Ruth, chapter 2, is where we are this morning. If you have been following with us, then you're familiar with where we are, and yet even you might need a little bit of a reminder because we've taken a break the last couple of weeks. We have been celebrating Jesus, our King. And really, it's not actually that different from what we have been doing in Ruth. In Ruth, we have been seeing this story of redemption. We have seen these people, these characters, Naomi in particular, who is in need of redeeming. She is a character that maybe starts off as sympathetic, but as we listen to her, as we think about what she has said and kind of the way that she has lived, we see that she is somebody who needs to be redeemed. And so it is kind of fitting that we take a break and that we pause for a couple of weeks to see Jesus Christ, the Redeemer, who was crucified, dead, and risen. But this is one of those wonderful opportunities that we have to be able to see the Redeemer in all of Scripture. The same Redeemer that we talked about the last 2 weeks of Jesus is the same Redeemer that we actually see hints of in the book of Ruth. So would you follow along while I read from the book of Ruth in chapter 2? I'm going to be starting the reading in verse 5, but the sermon will look at verses 8 through 16. Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord. For you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." And at mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of the bread and dip your morsel into the wine." And she sat by the reapers, and he passed her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Then she rose to glean. And Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." This scene that we have before us is a scene of Boaz and Ruth. Boaz and Ruth interacting. It's an interesting scene because it tells us so much about Boaz. And so this morning, our first point this morning is really to look at the goodness of Boaz. Boaz is good and kind. He is a good and kind man. We see this character of Boaz really coming out here in chapter 2. We talked about him a little bit when we looked at the first section and how he didn't necessarily live on this field, but he was coming to see what was going on. And we see it first, actually, before we even started reading. He comes and he greets all of his servants, and he says to them, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." There is some kind of relationship that Boaz has with his people, his servants, the people working in his fields. There is some kind of goodness that they recognize in him. They're not just responding to him to be nice to him, but it seems as if they actually are thankful for what he has said. When he says, "The Lord be with you," and they answer, "The Lord bless you," it's a perhaps just a common greeting, but I think there's a little bit more to it. I think they genuinely mean that they wish the Lord's blessing upon him because they like him. He is a likable person. He is good and he is kind. He knows what's going on in his fields, in his land. And yet there's one thing that he doesn't understand. There's one thing that he doesn't quite know. He comes over to his young man and he says to him, "Who is this woman? Who's this young woman in the fields?" Now, again, this is an indication of the kind of man that he is. It says that there are a number of women coming and gleaning after the harvesters. And it's only this one young woman that he looks at and says, "I don't know her." If we remember our where we are here, the reason that people are gleaning is following after those who are doing the harvesting and picking up kind of the scraps. Those who are gleaning, they're doing that because they are poor. Or because they are widows, because they don't have a job, because they don't have a field of their own. They are doing this because they are in great need. And the indication here is that Boaz recognizes and knows all of those who are gleaning. He knows who the poor people are in his fields. And so this one young foreign woman stands out, not just because she's a foreigner. He doesn't mention that first. He just asks what family she is from, who she is with, whose young woman is this? Who does she belong to? He knows his people well enough to know that Ruth is not one of the people who's normally there. Boaz then goes on to demonstrate his goodness, his kindness, in that he reaches out to Ruth and he actually calls her over and speaks to her. This, again, is something that is maybe not so crazy in our world. We might think of this as a perfectly normal thing to do. The owner of a company sees somebody new and he says, "Hey, let me talk to you. I just want to talk to you. I want to get to know you a little bit." But the idea that this upstanding citizen who is the owner of this field, who is not, by the way, doing any of the harvesting himself, he doesn't need to. He has people for that, right? He is going now to reach out and talk to this young foreigner who is a woman, who is poor, who is dependent on gleaning in his fields. There is a great chasm between these two individuals. A good and upstanding and wealthy man, single man, speaking to a young foreigner who is poor and widowed. There is a great gulf between them socially, economically, even spiritually, some would say. And yet, Boaz doesn't seem bothered by this at all. He simply talks to her as if she is an equal. And Boaz, as he begins talking to her, he again shows his goodness. He shows his kindness. He tells her, "You don't have to go anywhere else. You can stay in my field with my young women and following my young men. I am going to make sure that these young men will not bother you, will not harass you, that the young women will allow you to gather as much as they are gathering. I will help take care of you and provide everything that you need." This might not have gone over so well with maybe some of the other young women. They've been coming to this same field, probably harvest after harvest, gathering and gleaning, and now there's another one that they have to compete with. Boaz puts an end to all of that. There's not going to be any competition. They're going to be able to work together. And not only that, we also get this indication at the very end where Boaz goes out of his way, not just to let her get an equal share with everyone else, but he also tells those that are working for him in his harvest to actually pull out some from what they're harvesting and purposefully leave it, purposefully drop it on the ground. Now, we live in a slightly different time, in a slightly different world. Is that something that we think would be common among people who own businesses now to just say, oh, I don't need the profit. That's fine. Just throw some money on the ground for the workers. Let the workers have extra money. I don't need to increase my salary as CEO. I want the workers. Actually, you know what? Even more than the workers, I want the poor to get my money. Is that what we think of? That's not going to happen in our world. CEOs' salaries continue to increase. Owners continue to take more and more money, and less of it seems to go to the poor and those who are actually in need. But Boaz is not concerned. He wants to take care, especially of Ruth, but also for all the other women. Ruth asks him why he would do this. Why are you acting so kindly, telling these young men not to harass the young women? Well, that seems like just a common, decent thing to do, and yet it would have been common. The young men who are out in the fields working, and they see a group of young women following them. These young men, their first thought would have been to say something, maybe even to act on their thoughts. But Boaz is providing materially, and he is providing by putting good rules in place and making sure that his young men are not going to say anything or touch them. And so Ruth asks him why. Why, Boaz, would you do this? Why are you taking such pity on me? Why are you taking care of me? And what he says is that everything that he has heard her story fully, and he really appreciates who she is and what she has done, and he even asks that the Lord would bless her. This is a fascinating turn of events. Back in Ruth 1, verse 19, when Ruth and Naomi first arrived back in Bethlehem, it says, when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up because of them. Not just because they were excited to see their old friend and family member, Naomi. They were stirred because Ruth came back. A foreigner, a Moabite, has come back and is living in Bethlehem, and the whole town is astir. Maybe you can imagine what that would be like in a small community where nobody ever leaves. And now this, what is seen as foreign, sinful woman comes into town. What do you think it means that the town was stirred up at this news? There are rumors. There is gossip. There's all kinds of things being said about Ruth. And apparently those rumors or that gossip has made its way back to Boaz. Boaz has heard these rumors too. But Boaz isn't gossiping. Boaz is not being led by the rumors of what other people are saying. He says, no, I actually sat down and listened to what was said about you. About you, your character, how you have acted. Not about your background, not about where you're from, but about you as a person. How you left your father and mother and your native land. How you came to a people that you did not know before. How you care for your mother-in-law. These are the things that Boaz took out of all that gossip. The character of Ruth. And it moves us into the second point this morning, something that Boaz and Ruth share. They share faith in God. Boaz is speaking to Ruth, and he is being good and kind because that is his character. He is following the law of Moses. He is following the law of God. But it's more than that. It is not just a agreeing to do what the law says, even though he doesn't really want to do it. This is who Boaz is because he has faith in God. And so when he says to his people, the Lord be with you, he means it. He wants the Lord to guide them, to be with them. And when he says these things to Ruth, he's doing it out of faith in God. Listen to what he says in verse 12. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. We talked about this with Ruth, that the thing that really sets Ruth apart in the first chapter from the other characters is her faith in God. She doesn't return simply because she cares about Naomi. That's part of it, but Boaz identifies why she's really here. You have come to take refuge in the Lord. That is why Ruth has come. She has come to find her refuge in the God of Israel, to take refuge under the Lord's wings. We read a couple of verses about this earlier in our service from Psalm 57. This is a common picture of the Lord. Those verses from Psalm 57 said this, "Be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge." Ruth has come to take refuge under the shadow of the wings of the Lord. And it's a faith that she shares with Boaz. Boaz asks that the Lord would bless. He prays, in a sense here, he's having a conversation with Ruth, but it's certainly coming from a genuine place in his heart where he asks that the Lord would give her good things because of her faith in the Lord. They share this faith in God. Boaz believes that the Lord will bless her, not because simply she has done some good things, but because she has come to God for refuge, so the Lord will bless her. This is a faith that they share, a trust in the Lord. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Lord willing, next week's sermon, we'll look at the final section here. But Naomi hints at this as well in verse 20, where she says, "May he," that's Boaz, "may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." We will dig more into that statement and what that shows us about Naomi and what the Lord is doing in Naomi's heart. But at here, what we can see is that this request that the Lord would bless Boaz, because the Lord's kindness has not forsaken them. Boaz is acting as an agent of the Lord. He is acting as one who trusts in God, whose faith is in God. And so he actually becomes one who brings the blessing of the Lord on to Ruth. And he, in some sense, is actually the answer to his own request. When he asks that the Lord would repay Ruth for what she has done, the Lord is repaying Ruth for her faithfulness by Boaz taking care of her. I think that Boaz has some sort of recognition of that, which is why he's so willing to speak to her and to set things up that are in her favor, to even invite her to eat with him. Again, a poor foreign widow who is gleaning among the fields, being sat with the workers right next to Boaz, where she can sit close enough to dip her bread in the same cup. Boaz, I think, has some understanding that he is helping to bring the Lord's blessing, or at least that's what he is attempting to do. He wants to be good and kind to her because he wants the Lord's blessing to be upon her. And so it is their connection really in their faith in the Lord, in their trust in God, their seeking refuge in the Lord that really sets up their relationship moving forward. It's one thing to take pity on someone and to say, I'm going to help you out because I feel kind of bad for you. We might have that We might feel that at times. Maybe you've been in a situation like that, where if you're in a city, or not even a city, just around it, and you see somebody that has maybe a sign, or they're asking for money, and they tell you the difficulties and the troubles that they have gone through in their life. And we say, boy, I really want to help. You say, I don't have a lot of cash, but here you go, here's $1, here's $5, it's all that I can do. We have pity on them for their circumstances, but then what normally happens? We get in our car and we drive away, and we might never think about that person again. We were moved by that person's story, by the circumstances of their life. We had pity on them. We tried to help them out a little bit, but that's kind of where it ended. That's not where it ends for Boaz. This isn't just one nice meal that he's given her. This isn't just one thing that he has dropped in her lap. But he sets this up as an ongoing thing, that he will continue to care for her because of what she has done and because she is seeking the Lord and seeking refuge in the Lord. Boaz will provide exactly what he is asking the Lord to do for her. He will be the one who will step in and act, as I said, as the agent of the Lord, to actually help and to start to repay her faith in God. Ultimately, what we see happening in Boaz is we see Boaz beginning to act as a redeemer. This is an intriguing concept, an interesting thing that goes on through the book of Ruth. In fact, it's actually what we have titled at the start of this series, is that this is Ruth and Naomi in search of a redeemer. And Boaz starts to act as that redeemer. This concept is hard for us because when we hear about a redeemer, we think about the redeemer that we sang about all morning. We think about Jesus. And that's good, and that's right. We should think about Jesus as the redeemer. But before Jesus had come, what did that word mean? What did that look like? It was a concept that the people were familiar with. In fact, Naomi says to Ruth, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. Again, that's in chapter 2, verse 20. Boaz is one of our redeemers. We go, okay, we want to be really careful. We go, hey, there's only one redeemer. What do you mean, one of? The kinsman redeemer, the family redeemer. This is specifically set up for those who are widows. That one from an extended family member could marry one of these widows to continue the family name and the family line. And they were called a kinsman or family redeemer. Because even though the man had died, his widow was redeemed and his line is continued. And Boaz is one of Ruth and Naomi's redeemers. A family member of Elimelech, a family member of Ruth's own husband who had died. And what we see is that Boaz is starting to act like this redeemer. How did he act like a redeemer? Well, we've already kind of mentioned it, and I don't want to beat it to death. But Boaz bringing Ruth into this kind of personal relationship where he actually extends this grace to her, to talk to her, to include her, to treat her as a valued person. He begins by taking pity on her. But it's much more than just pity. He actually actively takes steps to bring her out of the situation that she is in, to take her out of the hopelessness that she finds herself in, to take her from being just a poor foreign widow to being a person who is known, who is cared for, who is loved. It starts simply by his talking to her. It continues with him providing for her, inviting her to sit down and to have this meal. And just look in this last paragraph. There is so much said in verses 14 to 16 about the way that Boaz acts as a redeemer. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel into the wine." Now, maybe this is only because the last 2 weeks have been Palm Sunday and Easter and Good Friday. But if a redeemer says, "Eat this bread and wine," what might you think about? I think that's on purpose. I don't think that God uses all of the exact same words of Jesus as an accident. Boaz, acting as Ruth's family redeemer, to redeem her husband's line and continue the family name, that is what he is doing. But just think about all of the meaning that is packed into the title of Redeemer, the one who sits down and says, "Eat this bread, dip your morsel in the wine with me." I don't think that we could go to a place like the Gospel of the Gospel of John. I have a couple of different references written down. But in the Gospel of John, in chapter 13, we think about Jesus in the upper room. And now this is not necessarily what we like to think of as good, but Jesus says this. He says, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at each other, uncertain about whom he spoke. One of his disciples asked, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread as I have dipped it." This morsel of bread that is dipped in the wine, in the case of Judas Iscariot, it is one where he is the betrayer of Jesus. But the picture of the bread being broken and given, the wine being given, is one of Jesus' own sacrifice, that actually the redemption for our sins is paid in Jesus' sacrifice of his body and blood. Boaz and Ruth were not thinking of that. Boaz and Ruth had not the opportunity to see this referring to an even greater Redeemer in the future. For Boaz and Ruth, this is a symbol of closeness, a symbol of redeeming her family, giving her hope for a future life in this world. But that picture is taken and it is extended and it is made even more marvelous in the New Testament that we have. And so when we look back and we see this, we go, "Oh man, if only they knew. If only they knew what was really coming." A Redeemer who isn't just giving bread and wine then to help her, to feed her, to redeem her life, but a Redeemer who is going to give the bread and the wine to redeem us for all time. That's one of the great blessings that we have, is that as God continues to show us more and more of his plan of salvation, we can see the beginning even more clearly than the people who are living through it. This is a wonderful promise for Ruth. This is a wonderful picture of hope for her, that she has a place at Boaz's table, that she is taken care of, she is well fed. In fact, what does it go on to say? He passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. This Redeemer has filled her up until she was overflowing. That's wonderful for her. It's what she needed in that moment. She needed this love and this protection. She needed to have the hope of redemption. She needed to be filled and even to have some left over. What a wonderful picture for us who have seen the greater Redeemer come, who are loved and welcomed by Him, that take His bread and His cup. We who are filled to overflowing by His Spirit. Boaz is acting like a redeemer, and he is acting very consistently like a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer of his day and age. But we get to see more because we know the end of the story. Boaz is a good and kind man who loves the Lord and has faith in God. And because of his faith in God, he cares for Ruth. And he redeems Ruth from her current situation. He can't offer to do more than that because he's just a man. It is what Ruth needs. It is what she needed at that time. And what a blessing to us that we get to see that even as Boaz acts in faith in God to help out another person, to redeem Ruth from her current situation, we can see Christ does even more for us. Boaz was a good redeemer. He was just one of the possible redeemers. We're actually going to hear more about the other possible redeemers later on in the story of Ruth. We have one Redeemer who has offered us the bread of His body, the wine of His blood, and who has filled us so that we are overflowing by His Spirit. It doesn't take away from what Boaz did to say that Jesus does it better. Boaz did what was good, what was kind, what was right for one who has faith in God. And this example is given to us and is recorded for us and written down for us by the Spirit of God so that we would be ready to see the one Redeemer and how what He offers us is similar, but so much better than even what Boaz could offer to Ruth in that day. And so when we come across examples like this, I want us to think about this. I want us to be prepared. And if you're reading through the Old Testament and you see these things, you go, boy, that sounds a lot like what is said about Jesus. We go, yes. It doesn't take away from the fact that Boaz was really doing this. Boaz was really living out his faith to care for Ruth. And he gets to be a picture, a glimpse, a foreshadowing of an even better Redeemer that we know in Jesus Christ. This is how Boaz shows us the goodness of a Redeemer. He shows us how good and necessary a Redeemer is. And it was exactly what Ruth needed at that time. Ultimately, though, her hope, her refuge is not Boaz. Her hope and her refuge is the Lord. And we have a Redeemer who is the Lord, our hope and our refuge.